everybody to please be mindful of the comments and of the agenda. But first, before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge that we are
Recording
on
in progress.
land, and that we do these works in the spirit of inclusion and not forgetting what the people who have lost before us gave so that we can have this opportunity. I appreciate and welcome any and all Indigenous efforts to be promoted in our works. And if there's any ways that our works can be reaching out to those who came before us, that we make sure that we include them and that we hear them. And with that, I would like to ask each of the voting members of the PHB to please introduce yourself. I represent Lived Experience. My term is up at the end of this month. If anybody would like to consider what that looks like or what is intended, please reach out to myself or someone on the staff of HSD, and we'd be happy to share what that looks like. Also, I represent the Lived Experience while serving on League, and so that's a Lived Experience group that is part of the PHB and a subcommittee of this group. I pass on to Mayor Venice.
Thank you, Chair. Lucy Venice, Mayor of Eugene. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Mayor Van Gordon.
Sean Van Gordon, Mayor of Springfield. Also happy to be here.
David Heverland.
Dave Haverland, United States Department of Veterans Affairs.
Vice Chair Brittany.
Hi everyone, Brittany Quick Warner, Vice Chair for Homelessness, CEO at the Eugene Chamber of Commerce, and the business rep for the committee.
Thank you very much, Brittany. Dr. Foster.
Dr. Willie Foster, I'm the healthcare representative, work as an ER doc for Peace Health and involved with a number of free clinics, and I'm always glad to be here.
Thank you. Catherine Ryan.
Oh, I'm here, sorry. Catherine, she, her pronouns. I'm the Pacific Source CCO representative.
Thank you. Julie, Hope and Safety.
Hi, Julie Wiesman, she, they pronouns, Hope Safety Alliance, Executive Director, and I am the Victim Services representative on the committee.
Excellent. Let's see here, just scrolling through. Are there any other voting members of the PHB that I have missed as Katie's staff? I open any other members who I have missed in introductions to introduce, and then we will go on to staff, and then we'll get into our agenda. Hearing no other introductions, may I invite Kate to introduce your staff?
Sure. Let's go to Kirsten first.
Hi, thanks. I'm just communicating with Susan Lopez, who should be in this meeting right now. So I'm just trying to figure that out. My name is Kirsten London, and I work with Lane County, specifically on the youth homelessness demonstration project, and then overseeing contracts that relate to youth and young adults.
Thank you. Diana?
Hi, I'm Diana Aldridge. I'm the Senior OA and your committee support.
Nancy?
Hi, I'm Nancy McReynolds. I am the new Landlord Liaison for the Housing Services Division, Housing and Community Action. I use she, her pronouns.
James?
Have to find that mute button. Hi, I'm James Yule, he, him, his. I'm the Street Outreach and Coordinated Entry Supervisor.
Maria?
Hi, I'm Maria Cortez. I'm the Program Service Coordinator. I work around sheltering.
Brianna?
Hi, everyone. Brianna Vincent. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Program Services Coordinator and overseeing anti-poverty and homeless prevention programs.
Amanda?
Hi, Amanda Borda, Senior Program Services Coordinator with the Human Services Division, and I work with our continuum of care.
Katie.
Homeless Services Supervisor, she, her pronouns, and I oversee and supervise the Program Services Coordinators.
Thank you all. And I'm Kate Butt. I'm the Housing Manager with Health and Human Services, she, her pronouns. And I'm glad to keep running with the agenda if you'd like, Chris.
Yes.
Great. So we have, today is a bit unusual because it ordinarily is an executive committee meeting and instead it is an all-member meeting, really due to the timing of the continuum of care application and needing to make sure that we consider the documents being put forth today. So we are seeking to approve the minutes from the August 18th all-member meeting. And those are found inside your packet that was sent out by Diana starting on page 2.
Kate, I'll move to approve those minutes.
Is there a second?
Second, Dr. Foster.
Thank you. Any conversations, edits, concerns? All right.
I've restored. I've agreed to let Kate go on the thing. Sorry if there's been a confusion.
Thanks, Chris. All right. Vote to approve the August 18th minutes. All in favor, aye.
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 Aye. Anyone opposed, nay?
Kate, I abstain. I wasn't at the meeting. This is Julie.
Okay. Thanks, Julie. And any other abstentions? All right, meeting's passed. Thank you. All right, so the next document to take a look at is on page 5 of the packet. I think we're getting used to starting to see this dashboard of the Human Services Community Action and Homelessness Program funding. We are early in the fiscal year, just about 2 months in. We were looking at just an annualized budget. We should be at about 17%, both in expenses and revenue. We are lower than that in almost every single category. The only exception is with capital projects outlay. The reason for the 100% spending there is that that's just finite expenses where it's often related to construction or rehabilitation. And so those dollars have been spent in full according to the budget for this year. One thing that I think is important to remember regarding the budget is that the vast majority of the county expenses are cost reimbursement. And so we accrue the costs, for example, get invoiced by our agencies first, and then either reimburse those agencies as the county, but often then have to seek reimbursement from the state or from the federal level. And so the expenditures being at almost 9% do not match the revenue being at about 4%. And that's logical because we're waiting for that revenue reimbursement. Any questions about the dashboard?
Kate, I have a quick question. Mm-hmm. So is reflected in this dashboard, do we have your projected reimbursement amounts? So I know that
we do not.
Okay. So is there ever a way to know what the accounts receivable might be?
I'm glad to check and see if we can do something like that for this selection of programs. That's a good question.
Thanks.
Kate, how do we take this information and actually, kind of in light with Julie's question, how do we figure out if we could have made different decisions or better decisions that would improve our revenues or expenditures, et cetera?
So the requirement of being a community action agency is that the board for the community action agency see the revenue and expense reports. And we've provided spreadsheets to this group for what seems like, I think, a number of years, and recognize that those are often kind of hard to understand. And so we hope that the dashboard would provide a little bit more explanation as to what is going on and where we are. Regarding kind of what to do with it, I think asking questions is very helpful, and I'm glad to go and find out the answers. But I'm not sure that there's necessarily something to kind of dig into, unless there's something that's a great concern to you that pops up either in the spreadsheets or in the dashboard. There could be an opportunity. I could invite fiscal staff to come and share a little bit more about where we are in the expense and revenues of the different programs that we have within homelessness and community action, and that might be helpful to continue to just know that things are moving forward well.
Thank you for that. I have one more follow-up, and is there anybody else who has? I see no hands. My follow-up, I guess, would be, is there a way to see this offset against the greater unhoused or poverty and homelessness project? Like, does this chart make up a tenth of it? Is it of what we spend as a county on these services?
So this encompasses the dollars spent by Lane County. And then Chris, you're asking regarding other dollars spent like through the city and private
Yes, ma'am.
dollars?
Whatever's in all these plans, because we have like 9 plans, whatever's all in this, I'd like to see how, because we touch little bits of it in different communities and different stuff. I was just curious, as it kind of ties into that projected revenues and other things, how can we utilize this information to see, well, maybe next year we do a little different with how we allocate materials or staffing, or maybe we add more benefits because we need to have more people of this need or whatever. I'm just trying to see how this financial dashboard, it seems a little bit too simple for me, but I just wanted to dig a little deeper and see what some of the other projected stuff are. But if it's not in existence, or if we need fiscal staff to help us walk through it, totally understand. Was just trying to understand. Thank you.
Well, and I think that, right now the bigger picture is this is just a Lane County group. And so I would be glad if there are other conversations happening that might be bringing together the funding that other entities are spending on homelessness, and we can bring it together. I'm glad to do that. At this point, nothing like that exists to my knowledge.
Thank you, ma'am. Any other questions on this topic? Seeing none, may we go forward?
Mm-hmm. So this is another picture broken down by funding source. And you can see the green indicates the expenses that have been accrued by the county within this fiscal year. The blue indicates the revenue. And so, for example, if we're looking at the LIHEAP portion of the chart, we have spent approximately 25% of the budget for this fiscal year. And have received 19% of the reimbursement of expenses back from the state via the federal government for LIHEAP. You'll notice that many of the different funding sources are at 0%, and that very much is indicative of that reimbursement that the county is waiting for from those different funding source entities. Data add an acronym chart at the request of the group at the last meeting, recognizing it's tough to keep all of those different acronyms straight. That's everything I have, Chris.
Mayor Van Gordon. Thank you, Kate.
So can you, when I think about all the different conversations at the county, is this only, like, how does this tie off to what Human Services Commission does? Are they all the same funding sources, or am I sort of confusing health and human service buckets?
And so you're asking if the Human Services Commission, if they kind of oversee these different funding sources?
Maybe oversees too strong of a word. I'm more trying to zoom out a little bit and go, okay, if we were in the human services world, would we have a chart like this that would be just, 10 different funding sources? Like, is this our chart and then human services has a different chart?
It would be pretty comparable. This encompasses community action funds such as the low-income home energy assistance program, which is definitely broader than just homelessness. And so I think that this would be something similar that the Human Services Commission might look at, though they tend to not, in my experience, kind of dig into the homelessness dollars, for example. It's more community action.
So this would not be representative of all the dollars that are floating around the county Health and Human Services Department right now for these type of, for essentially poverty and homelessness and human services. Like, there's more dollars out there that we don't see, we don't touch.
Correct.
Okay. Because that would be like the cities, that would be like the donations the cities make, and probably, I don't know, a million other federal programs that we don't know about.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, there's more.
Okay, this is Jacob. I kind of have a follow-up to Sean's question, which I appreciated. I guess what I'm hearing you say is on the chart that's on the screen, there's no redundancy or there's no no City of Eugene funding that's sort of showing up on these charts. I guess my follow-up is related to the much more granular and detailed spreadsheet that follows this. Is there any of the human services funding represented, I guess, on this document?
It's a good question. I'm glad to get back with you to make sure that I'm answering correctly.
But, I guess we have talked about, thank you. I appreciate the follow-up. But I guess kind of what Sean's pointing out is there a comprehensive document that talks about, sort of the writ large investment in addressing homelessness in our community? And I don't recall having seen one of those. And then, I think it goes beyond Lane County and the City of Eugene, right? Because there's rural jurisdictions that are making some investments. You know, Homes for Good has some funding that's addressing homelessness. So, so anyway, it's just being able to see the entire landscape is important, and I think we all need to continue to work towards that.
I think that's a really good point. And there are efforts, particularly between the city of Eugene and Lane County, to work to understand what dollars are supporting homelessness and to continue to branch out and include the smaller jurisdictions and Homes for Good. So it's something that I think the community is working toward. It's going to take a while, but I can certainly share what is developed along the way with this committee.
Kate, I'll throw out there, which I know I've thrown out to you before, something the business community is very interested in seeing, and we're willing to help fund the work to get it done. So I have some partners who are ready and willing to help. We just want to see that economic impact kind of cost analysis piece, because I think it's super important for to understand the big picture, like how much is going into this and where's the gap, so we know how to keep investing in the right ways if needed. So happy to help with however we can.
Thank you, Brittany. Mayor Venus, then Mayor Van Gordon.
Yeah, I just sort of wanted to pile on. Sorry, Kate. But I think there's there's an intermediary step, which is even just a chart that makes it clear, kind of the connect the dots for us between what agencies are spending money and where, so that we can sort of see. I think our problem here that you're hearing from us is this is a snapshot of a select group of investments that fall within the PHB's authority, but we don't have a sense of how that fits relative to all of the other investments to address this problem. And so even a chart without all the fine tuning numbers, even just the beginning, would be just connect the dots for us. This is what the Human Services Commission is dedicating, that is coming from the different jurisdictions. That, this is what we're labeling under the TAC report. I mean, just sort of that bigger picture, so that we can sort of see, and then maybe but I think we're all grappling with, where does the PHB's investment fit with the larger scope and the larger strategy? And it's confusing to us. So certainly, as Brittany is saying, it's confusing to the public.
Thank you, Mayor Venus. Mayor Van Gordon.
Yeah, and even I would think the first draft would only need to be directionally correct. We're going to give you a little bit of grace. If you come back and say this is 75, we're probably 75% sure we'll iterate it. A couple more times. And when it comes to this as a conversation, this is one of those conversations that has been sort of brewing out there at a couple of different levels, right? People around this table sitting it with different hats have, sort of asked for this, but I don't know that we have really an end in sight when we're going to actually see something. And, if it's always sort of been out there, and I would really love to get a solid date when we could see the first draft of what that would look like, because as a jurisdiction and a stakeholder for the county, I get frustrated with this kind of thing because we just don't have it charted yet.
Thank you, Mayor Van Gordon. We have a lot of, I'd like to ask Kate to follow up on these items. I will personally follow up on this as well as chair, to make sure that we are making sure the documents are explained or necessary as possible. We have a lot of material to go forward, so I please ask that we let Kate continue.
I'm finished, but I hear you. We'll work on that. Mayor Van Gordon, I hear your ask for a solid date. There are indeed efforts that are happening, particularly at the city and county convergence. And so my ask is for a few weeks for that to happen, and then I can come back with a more clear date.
Thank you, Kate. Please continue.
I think we can pass it to Brianna next.
Thanks, Kate. I will keep this brief because I know we're running a little behind. So I wanted to share a little bit of information today about the Lane County performance audit and why it's important to this group specifically. So the audit information, it may have been provided in the packet, and if not, we can get that sent out to everyone. It is looking at the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline mostly. This audit covers the time period of last year, April 2021 to December 2021. And during that time, there were no findings. As a general performance audit update, Lane County hasn't had an outside auditor in about 3 years since the previous person left, and then there was a hiring freeze due to COVID. So for the past 3 years, Lane County staff have been performing this audit internally. And there's been discussions around hiring for this position by the end of, or not by the end of the month, starting that hiring process at the end of the month so that we can resume regular outside audits. So no findings during that time. And I'm sharing this information today regarding the performance audit as a requirement for the CSBG organizational standards. CSBG is a funding source, the Community Service Block Grant. And the organizational standards are how we prove to the state funders that we're following the expectations of the funding source. As Kate mentioned, we are a community action agency, and that means that we receive those CSBG funds from the state of Oregon. And this PHB board serves as our board for the funding source and has a lot of requirements to fulfill, like looking at the financial information that was just shared, reviewing reports and audits, hearing program updates and information, and working on the strategic plan. And I just want to thank you all for being a part of that process and listening to these updates. If there's any questions.
Thank you very much. What's next on our agenda? We have the Continuum of Care Annual NOFO. Amanda Borda.
Thank you. I'm going to try to share my screen. I'm not sure who's sharing currently, but it's not allowing me to share mine. Okay, thanks. Let me see. Okay. All right, so the moment is here. I'm going to give kind of an overview. You have a lot of information in your packet that was sent ahead of time. I'm going to give an overview of our consolidated application that we are hoping to submit very soon for the Continuum of Care. So we've brought a number of things so far to this group during this process, but this is sort of the final approval of a couple of items that we are required to get approval for by this board. And so we're seeking approval today for 2 items. One is our final ranking, which we also will refer to as our priority listing, and then the final draft and sort of go ahead on submission of the COC total consolidated application. So I'm just going to go through some highlights of both of those items and sort of talk about the next steps. And then if there are questions, we can answer those before we do sort of a final vote. All right, so as I mentioned, there are sort of 2 major parts of this application that we submit, and combined they make the consolidated application. So our priority listing or ranking includes several different listings of projects, including our renewals, our new projects that we are hoping to fund, and then our planning project and any reallocation if applicable. And so all of the project applications for the individual projects are actually sent with this priority listing to whichever one they correspond. And so that's how those project applications get submitted to HUD. And then the other piece of it is, of course, our large narrative COC application, which includes a variety of information. And I won't go through that in detail, but I'll sort of pull out the highlights and sort of strengths that I see in some areas that we might improve for next year as well. So first, to talk about our ranking or priority listing, all of our renewals and new project applications have to be ranked in tier 1 or tier 2. So you'll see that ranking document in your packet. The ranking is completed by members of this group, and a few members of League participated. So that included Brittany, Catherine Ryan, Sheriff Harold, Martha Bryson, and Richard Self. So those members met on the 7th and completed the ranking process. Through that process, they reviewed a variety of scenarios. I think there were about 8 in total that they reviewed, including some variations of those. And really this process is meant to prioritize our projects for HUD in the event that there is not enough funding available. There's sort of a set process of how HUD will fund projects in the order that we prioritize them based on a very specific sort of scoring process. And so we're required in this process to rank projects based on really objective criteria based on the scoring that we complete. So for our continuum, that usually includes our annual evaluation of our projects, with which we've also brought to this board, so you should be familiar with that. We complete that process before this NOFO so that we have those scores ready to go. So primarily our ranking is based on those scores and the criteria we look at through those metrics. So this year, you'll see that the scenario that the committee approved was putting our system capacity projects, which we just refer that as HMIS, sort of the projects that are for the system and are not direct projects at the top, and then followed by new projects that have not yet sort of had a first year of operation. So that includes the NEL. It was funded last year through the COC annual application, but as we know, just started in July, and so it does not have sort of a full year of operation to score. And then followed by renewal projects by performance, and they looked at an average of 3 years of scores. We don't have to do that. They looked at different scenarios that review 1, 2, and 3 years. And so they chose to go with an average of 3 years of scores. And then finally, it's followed by the bonus project. So that includes our coordinated entry new project and the DV bonus, domestic violence bonus for coordinated entry as well. So that's the final scenario that they came up with, and we will be asking for sort of final approval of that document as required by this board. Just to give a little overview about sort of some of the things that the group talked about, they really thought about where to put new projects in relation to renewals. That's always kind of the biggest question when it comes to the ranking, and whether to prioritize bonus projects that are not yet funded in our system above projects that we already have. And also the question of where to put the projects that don't have direct service as well. So we talked about a number of different scenarios and how that might impact and sort of who would then fall into tier 2, which would be considered at risk. And so this is ultimately the scenario they felt really captured the priorities the best. Trying to think of, I thought there was something else I was going to share. I think some of the concerns that came up were really around, with the bonus projects being coordinated entry projects, would have liked more opportunity to understand from the broader KHB about whether those should be prioritized above other projects and sort of where those fell in terms of high priority or lower priority. And I think that just speaks to the kind of longer conversation the group is having around strategic planning and what our goals are. And so how we make sure that this ranking process reflects the overall priorities of the board was something that came up as something we want to maybe do better next year or feel more prepared about. So we wanted to be transparent about that piece of the conversation as well. I will invite folks who participated. I know there are a couple, Catherine and Brittany at least. I don't know if I saw anyone else, but if either of you have any other additional comments that I missed that you'd like to share about the ranking process, happy to have you share.
Yeah, I mean, I can chime in and just honestly to reiterate kind of what Amanda said. So when she presented, we had 8 different scenarios, and basically you have priority 1 funding, priority 2 funding. Priority 1, we feel pretty safe it's going to get, those projects will be funded. Priority 2, unclear. And there's a couple new projects. I don't know, I'm trying to pull up the board packet to see, can we share what they were? Because I feel like it was important for us to, like, for instance, yeah, were the new projects on there?
So I have there were the 2 new projects that are in tier 2 or the bonus, so not yet funded. So those I have up on the screen. were you looking for something else?
Well, so like the Nell, for instance, was a new project. It didn't have any data because it wasn't a project last year. So when we looked at the rankings, that one was a new project, but we prioritized that towards the top because we knew that the projects has the project coordinators, et cetera, have the history and the success of doing this. We wanted to make sure that Nell project got funded. We did put the coordinated entry at the bottom, the bonus, because we prioritized the housing units over that project. That was the big debate that we kind of went back and forth on, is if we could bring in new funds for coordinated entry, should we put that above housing projects that could, in theory, lose their funding, and we could lose those units for the people who are being housed there. So that was kind of the back and forth that we had a lot as a committee, is how do we, which of those two things are more important when it comes to the funding? And we decided as a committee that the housing units were more important. So hopefully we still get the bonus and we could do that coordinated entry project, but if not, that's why it was at the bottom.
Thanks, Brittany. So you have, I'm showing now on the screen, the final ranking that we're hoping to get approval on today. You can either wait till the end and we talk about the application, or do folks have other questions or want to move for a vote on this ranking first, and then we can talk about the COC application either way.
Can we get any more input? Thank you, Brittany, for sharing the input on it. Catherine, or is the sheriff available to just weigh in on their process real quick? I have a question in regards to the coordinated entry, but I wanted to yield before because I did not participate in this process.
I think Brittany did a good job, and Amanda kind of summarizing what our conversation and thinking was.
Awesome. Well, I really appreciate the hard work that Brittany put into this, and I'm open to calling the vote if that's where it's at this moment. I just wanted to check in and see, as we continue to develop coordinated entry, how are we going to do so and get people into these new unpopulated projects effectively if we aren't building a robust coordinated entry program? So I hope that whatever we do moving forward, if maybe we put it into our NOFO or whatever these other funding opportunities we're doing, if we aren't going at it at this plan, that we actually speak to it before we call that vote, just so we know that we are factoring in coordinated entry and we don't spend any more staff time working on something that we're not seeking funding for. I yield. Amanda, I go back to you.
Okay. I wasn't sure if I had heard that you were ready to move for a vote on this.
I'm willing to entertain one, but on the grounds that we speak to how we're going to fund coordinated entry, or if we're going to not be making that part of our next steps.
Sure. So we did talk a little bit about that. And I think overall it's difficult in this process. Obviously something has to fall into tier 2, and it's always very difficult to say, right, we're going to prioritize these kind of system level investments above projects that have actual units. And so that could result in us losing inventory. And that's a really challenging decision to make. So I think for this instance, it was hard to sort of prioritize those projects, but I think there are other ways that we can think about that. We can always look at reallocation opportunities next year. So if there's funding that's being returned that we're not able to fully utilize for a variety of reasons, but able to keep the unit levels that we have, that might be an easier decision to make. Just essentially using our existing funding more efficiently might be an option. And that would just take more of a closer look at really how much funding we all have in our projects and what we're not able to use. So that's one option to think about next year, and that sort of just repurposes existing funding. I think the other thing is just thinking about other funding sources that we might be able to use too, and making more local investments in those types of system level projects is often something that COCs have to do, just because it's difficult to prioritize in this process over units. So we'll have to look at what other funding sources too that we might be able to contribute to some of these priorities as we move forward with coordinated entry improvements.
Thank you, ma'am. Would anybody like to entertain a motion to support the rankings as this committee has put forward? Or is there another action that this body would like to do?
I'm happy to move to support the rankings as proposed by the subgroup.
Can we get a second?
This is Sean. I will second.
Seconded by Sean Murphy, moved by Mayor Venus. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Sorry.
Aye.
Chris,
Aye.
point of order. I just want to clarify that anyone who is a recipient or subrecipient on these projects should abstain from the vote just for conflict of interest purposes. It's a requirement of the COC to not participate in any decision or voting on the ranking.
Thank you. Does that change our vote?
So, yeah, Chris, that means I have to recuse myself because we're on the NEL project.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Sean, for that. Thank you, Amanda, for that clarity. Dr. Foster, did you have a statement you wanted to make?
No.
I'll second the motion since Sean needs to pull back.
And is that Susan Lopez?
Yep, that's me. Thanks.
Awesome, thank you. Seconded by Susan, moved by Mayor Venus. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Sit by opposed. Hearing none. Any abstentions? One, it looks like. One abstention. Motion carries. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, team.
Thank you all for that. I know the ranking is always a very challenging process and there's a lot of requirements around it, so it's a bit cumbersome. I'm going to move on just for the sake of time. We have the COC application to approve as well. And I'm not going to go into a lot of depth about it. Oh, sorry, I think my slide is wrong. I'm not going to go into a ton of in depth about it. We did go through a lot of that last year, went through a lot of the questions more specifically. And so I think for this year, I just wanted to highlight really, you know, some of the major points that I felt like were, sorry, I'm just trying to figure out my slide because it's not pulling up the correct one. There we are now. So I just want to pull out some of the highlights so that we can pull out exactly what was kind of new this year, as well as kind of strengths and challenges. So overall, the application, you'll see in your packet, it's quite long, so I think we included a link to it. So I encourage everyone to read it in full. It has a lot of information in there about what our continuum of care looks like, what our strategies are, and the work that we've been doing over the past year and beyond. Overall, the questions look fairly similar to previous years, so that's why I don't want to go into sort of each section one by one. A lot of it's going to be repetitive of previous years, since some of it doesn't really fluctuate from year to year. But some of the changes that do happen from year to year are really based on those HUD priorities that they outline in the notice of funding. So this year there was an increased focus on participation from people with lived experience. So there were some additional questions that we were able to answer in our COC application this year, which was pretty welcome. I think that's a strength of ours. In the past, we haven't really been able to speak to really a lot of the work of League. There just weren't a lot of opportunities to do that. And so I was happy that we were able to speak to some of that work this year. There was also an added question regarding the efforts to increase affordable housing. So this speaks to one of HUD's new priorities. I think this just goes to a larger conversation that's happening around, obviously, just the availability of housing in general in the communities and the struggles that we're having around that. And so HUD's asking sort of what we're starting to do around increasing affordable housing. There were some questions around coordination with public health and increasing non-congregate shelter. Last year, we had an entire section dedicated to our work around COVID-19 coordination. And so that section was removed. And there were just one or two questions around generally how we're coordinating with public health on COVID-19, as well as any other communicable diseases. And then also how we're sort of continuing to increase non-congregate shelter. So we were able to speak to that as well. Racial equity continues to be emphasized overall. That's been the case for a number of years. And there were quite a lot of questions to answer. And questions as to how racial equity relates to sort of other sections of the continuum of care application as well. So I think some strengths that we have are we do have broad involvement from a lot of stakeholders and representation on our board and in our continuum of care. We have really strong coordination with our public housing authority, and we've really been able to leverage a lot of our voucher programs and work collaboratively on those. We've increased a lot of efforts around the areas of coordinated entry and street outreach, and sort of that coordination of that engagement at a system level has really improved. So we've been able to say a lot more about that work. Overall, our policies and procedures around rating, ranking, evaluation are solid. So we're able to answer how we really objectively look at our projects. And then our system performance strategies, I think, are strong. They don't change sort of from year to year very much. I think we know what we're doing towards each of those metrics, but I think we are able to speak to a lot of strategies that we're implementing for those system performance questions. As far as like challenges and areas that I think we can improve upon, I think we can certainly still increase participation of people with lived experience. Certainly we can speak to League, but I think we need to expand upon League. We need to increase membership of that group, but also increase participation of people with lived experience on the overall board, so that it's not just one seat that has that representation, but that folks with people with lived experience are sort of interwoven in all of the work that we're doing, and we're really centering that. Same with racial equity. We've really started to do some analysis around racial equity in our community, but beyond that, we really need to move forward with sort of what follows from that. So now that we've analyzed, what more analysis do we need to do of our data, and also what changes do we need to make to our programs to make sure that they're equitable and accessible, and how do we also incorporate more culturally specific organizations in our work, and tribal organizations. So there are some gaps there that I think we really need to start addressing. Project performance specifically, we did have, you'll see in the ranking, in the evaluation scores overall, that project performance did sort of go down a bit over the last couple of years. And I think part of that is due to just some impacts of COVID, low vacancies and a lot of staff turnover. Really hit the programs hard over the last couple of years. So I think we have some work to do just to get those programs back up to where they should be. And then I think a couple other areas are training provided by the COC. There are a lot of questions in the COC application around what trainings we provide annually, mostly around HUD requirements. But I think we got a little off track in terms of regularly providing training during the pandemic as well. So I think as we build up our capacity at Lane County, that's something we can maybe shift our focus back to, making sure we're providing those trainings regularly. And then lastly, around coordination around domestic violence services and access. You know, we've had this domestic violence bonus opportunity for a number of years, and we don't ever sort of feel super strong about what we're submitting for that. So I think there are definitely some areas we can improve in that area of work, and really dedicate some effort to making sure we're coordinating that on a system level too. I see, Chris, your hand is up, so I'm going to stop there.
I really want to thank you for giving this layout and this review. I do have a statement regarding the challenges, but I want to just ask you before I ask that, make that statement. What do you feel is the most surprising thing you've learned in the review of our COC partners?
Surprising thing I've learned in review of our partners. I don't know if I was ready for that question. I don't know that I had of anything off the top of my head.
Well, no, thank you. I just wanted to see, sometimes when we do these reviews, we do these processes, we learn something, and or it gives us something that we can maybe focus on next time. I want to say I support these challenges. I would like to maybe work on the wording for increasing participation of PLE, people with lived experience. It needs to be safer for people with lived experience to participate in all processes. Even having participated in some of the reviews early on in this process, I wanted to make sure that people were still afraid that there would be retributions or repercussions for them participating in some processes. And so while we continue to do this and while we continue to do it all the way up to the county, I hope that we look at what is protected space for lived experience. Jacob?
Thanks, Chris. As it relates to project performance, I know that the Shelter Plus Care Madrone, which is a Homes for Good administered COC program, I think we're like a C plus if you use the traditional kind of grade mechanisms. So I guess one, Amanda, will Con brief me on like why our performance was low, but I can't remember the details. Could you like share for our program, like what was our challenge? Because I just want folks to actually know specifics.
Sure, I don't have your scores necessarily in front of me, but I'm happy to always also schedule a follow-up to take a deep dive into it. And just in general, all of the scores are now actually for the first time required to be attached to the COC application. So when we post this online, you'll be able to see everyone's score sheets posted, and you can take a closer look at each project. But I think overall the areas I can speak to, and I don't know that these were, I can't recall offhand what your sort of areas were, but some of the areas I know a lot of projects lost major points on was really around spend down, which I think was for a number of reasons. Some have challenges just in tracking their spend down, but I think it was also unit vacancies, unable to fill those quickly results in not spending rental assistance or leasing, as well as staff turnovers result in not being able to sort of draw down funds dedicated to staff salaries. And so over the last couple of years, that's really been more of an issue than in the past. So that was a big hit on some projects, as well as I would say utilization. So if you're not always above 80% utilization, so not fully utilizing your units, that was also somewhere that folks didn't score on. And then overall just performance makes up, I think, over a third, as we get points for it being over a third. So I think that makes up the biggest chunk of the score. So exits to permanent housing, increases in income and non-cash benefits, as well as quickly placing people into permanent housing. So those are really the biggest areas that folks didn't score on. We also added a section on racial equity and what sort of agencies are doing around that this year. And some agencies got points there and some didn't. It was sort of our first opportunity of looking at that. So we're hoping for improvement next year, but some agencies really didn't score on that as well.
Okay.
I don't know if that helps.
So let me make just a brief point, and then I did have one follow-up question. So, so in Oregon and across the West Coast, the reason why there's so many people experiencing homelessness is because for the last 3 decades, there hasn't been enough housing built for people from all income levels, right? So we've talked about this as a body. It's a known fact that one of 2 major drivers behind the crisis of homelessness in our community is just the lack of housing that's available. So just so folks know, like one of the reasons why our project scored low is we can't find housing for the people that have been given one of these rent assistance vouchers, right? So I just want folks to know that, you know, some of these scores are because we don't have enough, some of these lower scores are because there just simply isn't enough housing to lease up in the community. So then my follow-up question related to project performance is, how much of how projects are measured as it relates to performance is sort of dictated by HUD, and how much flexibility does Lane County have in terms of how project performance is assessed, and how are providers notified of changes to project performance assessments? Because for us, and I think the system writ large, like if we know that there's going to be project performance changes, or we're going to be measured differently, and we know that, you know, sort of a year ahead of time, it's it allows us as a system, I think, to actually improve scores or make sure our scores are as high as possible. So can you just speak to kind of that body of work?
Yeah, so you'll see in, I think it's section 1E of our COC application, there are a number of questions that were asked about our project review and ranking procedures. And that's really where we speak to our evaluation process. And even in the instructions, there are really specific criteria that to get full points in that section, we really have to meet. And so we try to be mindful of that in our development of our evaluation process. We do that, as the COC lead, but we also bring that to a committee for approval and review. And so we don't sort of do that single-handedly, but we try to keep it consistently over the years so that we're able to sort of compare scores over years. So we don't like to make huge drastic changes. The performance measures have stayed roughly the same over the last year, and they really specifically connect to system performance measures that we report to HUD. So that's a big chunk of what we're scored on. To get full points, we'd have to have, I think, over 33% be dedicated to project performance. And so that's why it's most of the score. We also get points for how we measure vulnerabilities and prioritize projects in that regard, and how we sort of look at things like chronic homelessness, and how we give points to projects that are prioritizing the most vulnerable. So we have to speak to that area as well. So that's where you'll see that system priorities section, as well as the housing first section, which we also get scored on in this application, the amount of projects that are housing first. So all of those parts of the evaluation are really tied directly to points that we get in the COC application. The second part of your question. Oh, and so that process happens usually in the spring. We try to do that sort of in coordination with our monitoring. And so I don't know if there's other ways that we can be more transparent or get feedback from the providers. We certainly don't want to create an evaluation that is easy for everyone to get 100% on. It's meant to really take a look at our projects. And we know, you can see across the board this year that a lot of our projects were lower in scoring. And so it's certainly not your projects alone that struggled. But I think we try to consider things like COVID-19 and impacts of the pandemic over the last couple of years when we're thinking about evaluating and ranking projects. So happy to always hear impact or feedback on how that could be changed and how we can do that process differently next year as well. Did I answer all of your questions?
Yeah, just super helpful. Just the last very brief point that you don't need to respond to. I would also say that, these measurements are dictated by HUD in Washington, D.C., right? And in like utilization of the funds, that standard spread across the nation. And there's a lot of housing markets where there is plenty of supply. So I would point out that states like Oregon, communities like Lane County are sort of downgraded by a national system that doesn't take into account our housing supply challenges.
Thank you, Jacob. Mayor Van Gordon.
Oh, unfortunately, Jacob, I just saw an article that said that coastal housing problems are now mid-country housing problems. So everybody may be catching up to us in a bad way. So I guess my I had sort of two questions here. I see sort of strengths and challenges, but I guess my question when I see this is, when you look at this from a COC perspective, what's really the threats that we're facing? And I know you didn't do a SWOT, but I'm like, well, what's the institutional, when you look out and you see the headwinds about doing this type of work, what's the things that puts this type of work at risk?
Oh, that's a good question. I think, obviously the issue of just having availability of housing is one of the biggest ones that we face. There's any amount of money that we can get through the COC, but if we're not able to spend it effectively at the ground level, it's not helpful. And if we don't have housing, that's going to be a big challenge. And I think that speaks to the increase in affordable housing priority that HUD put in here, that they're seeing that in a lot of COCs, kind of giving that feedback. And I think the other, I wouldn't say it's a threat, but I think it's just a challenge that there are always competing priorities and there's limited resources, right? And so how do we sort of balance that at a local level in our planning and our strategic planning? That's always going to be a challenge. We want to prioritize, obviously, shelter and sort of those immediate crisis responses because we see the issue so broadly in our day-to-day lives. And that seems like the one thing that we should do, but at the same time, we also need to really think about permanent housing, right? And so what follows from those crisis services. And it's really hard when you only have enough resources to think about one or the other. So that's always kind of a threat where we just have a lot of competing priorities and a lot of needs that aren't being met. How we really look at that. And I don't know if that answers your question, but those are sort of things that come to mind.
So I'm really hearing that when you look out, that there's a real risk that as a group of community, whatever term you may have, that we may take our limited resources and slice them so thin across so many folks, right? That we, instead of getting 2 or 3 things done, we may only, we may do 10 things 10% of the way.
Yeah, there's always, yeah, those tough decisions to make, and no one wants to say we're not able to serve huge groups of people, but that's sometimes just the reality of where we are with the amount of resources that we have through these types of things like the COC. It doesn't go very far.
And I guess my second question would be, right, you look through all the data, you look through all the, the grant application. What's the kind of the elephant in the room that you don't think anybody's talking about? That like the in-depth conclusion that if maybe a little bit on the awkward side, but like what's the thing we're not seeing or talking about that we should be discussing going out the next 5 years?
The first thing coming to mind, honestly, is really, and I know we've already talked about it, so I don't know that it's a secret, but it really around just provider capacity in our community. Is becoming more and more of a challenge. And so as we have these opportunities come up with new funding every year, broadening what we're doing in terms of our strategies, we can have a number of strategies that we want to move forward at the system level. But if we don't have on the ground workers who are effectively trained to do that work and who want to stay in the work and who are paid effectively, and we don't have the resources at our agencies and the capacity to really do that, if those agencies don't have what they need, we're not going to be able to take these opportunities that come up. And so that's sort of the big thing that I think, and we're already kind of tackling that with a number of different strategies. There are some capacity building grants, but I think we're hitting a point where that's going to be just an ongoing challenge of, we want to do things at the county, city level, but if we don't have folks who are able to do those activities, we're going to hit that wall.
Thank you. I know I threw some tough questions your way. They're not softballs.
Thank you, Amanda. Do you have any more on this portion, or are we on to the NOFO portion? Okay.
I think I don't know how much time I've spent, honestly. So let's move for an action. I think we are just looking for a final vote of approval and submission of this. And once we get that approval, we're going to be posting. Today, we're actually required to post the ranking 15 days ahead. So we're going to get that posted today along with the projects. So you'll be able to see that. And then the final application will be posted to our website at least 2 days before we submit. But we have to route that internally for signatures. So that will be happening starting early next week. So hoping just for an overall approval today.
Thank you. Folks, do we have any last discussion before we call this for a full vote? Seeing none, may I entertain a motion to both post the rankings and submit the final draft and submission for the COC application?
I'll move to do so. Brittany.
I'll second. Julie.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Any opposed, signify by saying nay. Hearing no nays, is there an abstention? Sean?
No.
Amanda, do I have to abstain from this one?
No, I don't believe so. It's just for the financial ranking part.
Fair enough.
Okay.
Awesome, thank you. Then no abstentions, all motion carries. Thank you. Is there discussion on the NOFO next?
Chris, I just had a brief comment. This is Jacob, and I usually don't talk this much, but I'm getting fired up here. So I do want to point out, this capacity issue discussion is important. I know we've talked about it as a body, but I feel like what I'm hearing at times is like community-based organizations don't have the capacity to do what the jurisdictions and the community more broadly have the funding to do, right? In the context of these HUD continuum of care grants, the administrative costs allowed aren't enough to pay employees at nonprofits a living wage, and they're not enough to pay the back office support that nonprofits need to, to keep up with all these like ways that we're scored by the continuum of care and HUD more broadly, right? So I'm sensitive to this message that our community nonprofits don't have capacity. If they were paid fairly, every one of us can scale up and do exactly what is necessary to deliver and to address homelessness in our community. So it's about fair pay. And what that means is that, in my opinion, the local jurisdictions have to take some general fund and they have to layer it on top of the administrative fees allowed by HUD, so that we can actually pay people in our nonprofits the pay they deserve, and that's really important. So I know this is a big topic, but I just can't keep my mouth shut about it. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Jacob, and I'm sure that we can have a broader discussion about this at another point. I'd be happy to. I know at one point we talked about having a panel discussion earlier in the year about this very topic, about capacity and about the needs of the nonprofits and the permanent supportive housing specialists. So let's continue to have this conversation going and look forward to having those points addressed. Thank you. Is there from the staff? I do know that we do have one single public comment so far. I would like to make sure that we have all of our business that we need to do done. Do we have any more votes or actions that we need to do, Kate?
We do, yes. I'll pass it to Amanda first, though.
Okay. And please, let's guarantee at least 6 minutes for public comment in case somebody else signs in. Thank you. Amanda?
Oh, me again. Okay. So I think in your packet you have another document around new projects, and hopefully someone can pull that up because I don't think I have it up. But in our, so we're working on 2 different continuum of care NOFOs right now. So we're moving on from the regular one that we complete annually to our supplemental unsheltered NOFO that was really, it's sort of a special NOFO that was released by HUD a couple of months ago that is specifically intended to address unsheltered homelessness. And so we're going to present a number of things today regarding that one as well. And this one's not due until October, but just with the timing of the next PHB meeting, we had to bring everything to this meeting. So first, I'm just going to talk about where we are in terms of the selection and new projects for that. Diana, do you have that in the packet, or let me see if I can pull that up. Sorry, hold on.
I think folks might be seeing it now, Amanda. New projects opportunity summary.
Yes, thank you. I thought I had it up and then I didn't. So as you'll remember, we did complete a selection process. We had 2 different RFPs or requests for proposals that were put out. And for this unsheltered one, we did get 1 proposal submitted, but unfortunately that proposal did not meet the minimum score that we require for funding. So it was ultimately not selected to move forward by the panel. And so at this point today, since we are already deciding to move forward with this submission, we do still need to determine what projects we are submitting for the amount that is available. And so we're providing today a couple of different recommendations that we've thought through and hoping to get sort of an opinion either way about what we should submit. So if you'll remember, we have about $1 million, a little over, and that's to cover a 3-year period. So that's the maximum amount that we're able to apply for. So roughly 350,000 that would be annually for the project to operate. There were a number of COC eligible project types that folks were able to apply for. For this purpose, we did eliminate a few as sort of being not as ideal for this funding. And we did narrow it down to a couple of options that we think really meet specific needs around unsheltered homelessness. The other thing to think about is that these projects do have to sort of directly connect to our unsheltered homelessness plan, which Kate's going to talk about in a minute. So we really tried to think about where are the needs with unsheltered folks and where are the gaps. So a couple of recommendations that I want to go over, and then I hope to get some input and feedback on these. Option one is a rapid rehousing project. And so as you know, that's sort of a tenant-based rental assistance model that folks can receive rent and case management for a period of time to achieve stability in housing. So for this recommendation, we're looking at utilizing the funding for rapid rehousing for single adults. We have actually very few units of single adult rapid rehousing in our community. A lot of this resource that we have is dedicated to families or families with children. And so we don't have a number of resources for single adults. Primarily, we dedicate our permanent supportive housing to that population. So we think this could really provide more additional resource for those residing in the navigation center, those who might be awaiting a permanent supportive housing placement. This could be sort of a bridge program. And then individuals who are in need of a subsidy, but not that PSH level or support. And so for that amount of money, in my very quick budgeting, we estimated it could support around 24 units at any point in time. And that projected budget would be the full amount to support that number of units. The other option too that we have at the bottom of the screen, we really see this need that we're hearing and that we're seeing around housing navigation and case management for individuals who are utilizing vouchers, and that could include emergency housing vouchers, Section 8, or stability vouchers. And I can talk a little bit about stability vouchers are a new opportunity that HUD has just sent out a notice about just recently in the last couple of weeks. It was mentioned in the unsheltered NOFO as we're going to be putting out these vouchers. And that was about the only information we had. We now understand that we can apply as a community as an interested PHA. So for a number of vouchers, we don't know how many yet until we express that interest to HUD. It could be a small amount. I think it's going to be competitive. I don't know. And so those vouchers could support individuals on our central wait list. Just like the emergency housing vouchers did, or how we would essentially prioritize those for people on our coordinated entry. And so we're really looking at what supportive services can support that work, because those vouchers don't always come with case management or housing navigation support. And so we think this money could support an estimated 2 staff that could support those individuals. And we estimated about 50, 60 individuals could be assisted in the first year. This could also be for individuals if we sort of support all the individuals that have vouchers and there are still additional needs. We could always look at individuals who are on the central wait list who aren't likely to be referred to other housing resources. So they're just sort of in that middle range. And the budget for this would be somewhere in the 125 to 135,000 range. So it would not probably encompass the full amount that's available. So that's important to keep in mind. So that's why we have option 3. If you did want to do sort of a combination of those two, we would just have to reduce the amount of rapid rehousing assistance that we're providing. We could do separate projects. And so we could reduce the rapid rehousing down to an estimated 12 units, about half, and do both types of projects in our community. That was a lot of information. I'm trying to go really quickly. I'm sorry. So we haven't talked about the unsheltered plan yet, but again, these really overall, we want to connect them to our unsheltered plan and the overall impact we want to have on unsheltered homelessness. So these are what we felt, as the COC lead would be the top priorities that we would look at for this funding. I'm going to stop there. Are there thoughts on this?
Yeah, Amanda, Lucy Venice, I just thought I would jump in with a question. So we just had this conversation about the challenge of utilization of folks not being able to move on into housing because of the housing availability. So I'm just trying to connect the dots with this proposal, which sounds fine, but I'm just wondering, are you going to bump up against this problem of having set this goal, but in fact, given the housing shortage, we can't meet this goal? So just wanting a little clarity on your thinking.
Yeah, I'll say that's probably still going to be a challenge for both of these project types, because we run into that with vouchers. We run into that with permanent supportive housing and with rapid rehousing, depending on how the permanent supportive housing is set up. But any programs that are going to use market units that are just available in the community are going to run into that challenge. I don't think that in looking at the other options of program types, that's going to be a challenge for any of the housing focused options. We don't have sort of a permanent supportive housing project that we could propose for this that would align with the timing and would be new. These have to be new projects. And this amount doesn't sort of cover a permanent supportive housing project in its entirety. So that's the challenge with that. There are other options here at the top as far as eligible project types, such as other supportive services only or outreach, but we hadn't identified sort of a project that we could submit for those options. So the answer is yes, that's still going to be a challenge.
Thank you, Amanda, on that. Do we have any thoughts or leaning? If we, with our COC recommendation was shelter focused, does one of these options help supplement the gaps in services or coordination that would make that request for funding supported? How do you feel about that?
Could you say that one more time, Chris? I don't know if I understood your question.
Okay, so does this, since we went with the COC without, like, is there any way that some of this might help support coordinated entry or better allocation of folks into housing so that they don't fall out and need to have more rapid rehousing stuff?
Yeah, so I mean, so supportive services only for coordinated entry is an option under this one as well, but we don't want to obviously submit the same projects under both opportunities because they could get funded under both. And so we have already, knowing that we've already submitted the coordinated entry projects for the regular COC NOFO, that wasn't a priority for this one. That COC NOFO, remember, is ongoing renewal funding. This one at this point is for a 3-year period that we're aware of.
Okay, well, thank you for that. Are there any other questions for people? Does anybody feel like they would like to move that we pick 1, 2, or 3?
So I thank you, Chair. Sorry, Lucy Venice, just want to jump in again. So if housing availability is potentially the bottleneck even for these funds, and we want to perform well because that's future funding, depends on how you performed with previous funding. I'm wondering if that means that option 3 is a slightly better choice because it sets a slightly lower goal for the number of people who are getting into housing, which may be more achievable. So just sort of, and then mixes in the other option of more navigation and case management. So just wondering what my colleagues think about that.
Looking for some hands raised. Would anybody like to tackle this with us? We have a very small window to make an answer, but how can we give feedback? Does someone really feel compelled about this? A smaller goal, more direct money? Where are we at?
Can you scroll it down to option 3 so we can see that a little bit clearer?
And can we have this forwarded to us so that way we know what we talked about? Please.
Yeah, and this should be in your packet, in the link that Diana sent out.
Okay.
There were just too many documents. It was too large.
Okay.
And I will say too, we do have our new Nancy, our new landlord liaison position building up at the county. And so we are hoping to do more work at a system level on securing landlords, securing units in the community. And I know that doesn't erase the challenge, but we are certainly trying to do whatever we can to secure those units more at a system level versus the project level too.
I know which one I would champion, but I want to hear from other folks before I put mine out, please. Is there one that's calling to you, Brittany? I know Mayor Venice opposed number 3 as a possible easier to obtain. Where does Springfield fit on this?
Yeah, I mean, I do kind of track with Mayor Venice's logic on this one. I'm kind of torn though. I'm not strongly pulled to any of them.
This is the one shoe fits and we have to get here before midnight. Right. I'd like to have people entertain a motion for option number 3. It covers both items that we need, both housing support for people who are not supported by the coordinating or likely to be supported by the coordinated waiting list, and also helping with supportive services, provided that those services are not solely tied to the people in the rapid rehousing. If there's clarification for that, I'd like to have that moved forward.
If a motion's what you're looking for, Chris, I'll move to put option 3 forward.
This is Dr. Foster, and I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, signify by saying nay. Hearing no nays. Any abstentions? Motion carries. Thank you, staff, for putting all this hard work all at the last minute, knowing that they didn't give you any warning and didn't give you much time. So I know that this was hard, but thank you very much for staying dedicated to this cause and trying to see beyond just one spectrum.
Thank you for helping us get a project submitted for this very last minute. We want to make sure we're using the funding.
Just as a time
appreciate
check.
the last minute decision.
Thank you. As a time check, I want to guarantee that I get the public comment that has been submitted. I have 4 minutes of public comment. Is there something that we can either move forward or that needs to be done today? Or can we get a 5-minute extension so that way we give public comment?
So what I'd like to propose, we're up on to many deadlines as I had shared. And one of the deadlines is making sure that we have an adopted unsheltered to permanent housing plan in the community. What we talked about at the last meeting, because it's definitely a truncated timeline, was to pull together all the different plans that exist within our community and then just highlight what are the strategies that the PHB is working on to help move particular objectives forward. I recognize that we don't have time to formally vote on this. And so what I would like to offer is in the next 2 weeks, and I'll send out a follow-up email, if folks have any feedback regarding this plan, and please remember, there's nothing new in it. It's all directly from our PHB one-year strategic plan, as well as from other plans that different entities have adopted or that Lane County has as well. And so what I think is valuable about it is it pulls everything together and we can see, what are all the related action items that are being focused on within our community that are helping to roll up to the overall goal and objective and help us move specific metrics forward. So if you have any feedback or any questions or want to sit down and chat with me about this, I will be able to do that for the next 2 weeks. And then after, I'd like to ask for an email vote to adopt this plan so that we can make sure we're on track to submit this as adopted in for the HUD NOFA at the end. Is that something that would be a friendly change to this agenda?
Yes, ma'am. Received
Head shakes,
and
yes.
yes, ma'am. We will support that. Awesome. Well, thank you, Kate. I will touch bases with you in the next day to see about our next steps on that, and I will help initiate that vote via email. I'd like to ask Kevin Cronin to please bring his public comment.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kevin Cronin. I'm the Director of Member Relations and Industry Support for Housing Oregon. We are having a conference coming up on September 28th and 29th. That's later this month. It's going to be in Portland at the Doubletree Hotel, but we are live streaming all of our workshops, and we have 42 different housing related workshops that we have put together. I'd like to invite you to attend. We're going to be giving out some industry awards. Folks on this call like HomeShare Oregon and Square One Villages are going to be presenting. And we're going to give out some industry awards like the Golden Hammer for the best new multifamily development, the Golden Key, the best new homeownership development. And we'll be recognizing our very own housing authority, Homes for Good, for their strides for equity. They're getting that award. So we're really excited. I'm going to drop in the chat some more information. We have over 550 people signed up, so it's a good way to get connected with other folks doing the same work that you're doing around the state. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin. And I look forward to seeing more about that, and I will help share the information as with our community partners. Mr. Teeter.
Thank you, and I also thank you for Jacob making the comments they did. One of the things that has always concerned me, and I've been with the agency for 12 years now, and I've seen over the years this issue of trying to get the entire county to operate as if services were provided in the Eugene Springfield area. The challenges and barriers in rural Lane County are different than in the Eugene Springfield area. For example, the spend down related issue and scoring of that. A lot of the rural areas have either seasonal employment, so there's a lot of ebbs and flows. There are issues that happen that create ebbs and flows, and to spend a certain amount over a certain amount of time consistently, I think, is a little unrealistic and actually unresponsive to the needs that are out there. However, I do understand why that exists, why there are concerns over that, but it's a little bit counterproductive to the rural areas. The other thing, and related to Jacob's comments about staffing, rural areas are also hit particularly hard because the employment pool is much more sparse. It often takes us 6 months to try and fill a position. And so when someone leaves, it creates a huge stress load on the existing staff. And again, it takes months and months and months to find someone qualified that is willing to work for the wages that a lot of the agencies are offering. And so I would ask that the powers that be, take these things into consideration when you're looking at scoring. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Teeter. We nonprofits all across the board feel your pain, but rural ones particular as well as the specialty needs. I'd like to invite everybody to share your comments, share your feedback with county staff, Diana Aldridge. Reach out to myself, rootedinspringfield at gmail.com. This shows on channel 21 on Xfinity and repeats throughout the weekend and online. Next month will be another general meeting because we got a lot of work in education to push through. So we want to make sure people have options. Please reach out. And other than that, meeting adjourned.